Welcome back to Wordy Wednesday. In case you haven't noticed, somebody has had a tough afternoon and needs some extra attention. It's been chilly out and he doesn't like chili. Do you? All right. I know. Yes, I love you. If you put that down, I can pet you. All right, that has to stay up. Okay. Anyway, Audie may be with me for most of this because he seems determined to be getting his cuddle today. Well, today I thought we would stay with our theme lately, which has been metaphors, and I thought we would talk about the most common of all metaphors, and those are war metaphors. And in addition to going over some metaphors, and believe me, I have an extensive list, I thought we would talk a little about why it would behoove us to take a closer look at war metaphors, why we use them, and why maybe we ought to rethink that. Okay, so when we come back, all right, you doing okay? Well, when we start talking about metaphors, at least in modern America, we can't help but hitting war a lot, you know, to the point where when I was looking for just the broad range of war metaphors, I actually started reading some doctoral dissertations about why this may turn out to be a very unhealthy way for us as individuals and us as a society to be thinking. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Let's just take a look at some of the metaphors. Act of war. That's one we hear in common everyday parlance. Well, it was an act of war. No, it wasn't. It was your sister-in-law snitching, your salt shaker or something. It was not an act of war, for heaven's sake. But that's how our minds work. All's fair in love and war. And that's an oldie but a goodie. And when I see that, the first thing I think of is, do you remember that Pat Benatar song, Love is a Battlefield? I'm going to see if I can just play a few seconds of it for you. Yeah, love is a battlefield. Well, that's going to encourage healthy relationships, isn't it? Put another arrow in your quiver. Okay. All that really means is to add something else to your stockpile. See, I'm going into military terminology. Into your group of assets, the things you can bring to bear to address a situation. Another arrow in your quiver can be another point to make in an argument, or, all right, at least now I can hold my papers. It doesn't have to be quite so martial, but it is. At gunpoint. Well, I felt like I was at gunpoint because, The salesman was telling me I had to buy this car, and no, you weren't at gunpoint. You might have felt pressured, but no one really put a gun to your head. But we use that expression, held at gunpoint. He had a gun to my head. No, no. Yes, it's a metaphor. Yes, it's hyperbole. But again, we have to watch how we are using these because it does affect the way we view situations. Here's another one, axe to grind. We all know that having an axe to grind means you have an issue at stake. You have a dog in the fight. That's one that I use. And this goes back, as we all know, to a time when war was literally fought with axes, and you would grind your axe, sharpening it. Battle of nerves, war of nerves. Yeah. To beat someone. We use that. It's such an idiom that we use beating, pummeling in all kinds of contexts that have nothing to do. We beat someone at a game. We beat someone in a race. We beat someone into the store in the morning. I mean, it's a very adversarial way to look at things. And, that whole concept of beating is physical violence. Let's see. Been in the wars. That's an expression we use to indicate that somebody's been through a rough time. And there are a lot of ways to say that, but we are choosing been in the wars. Bite the bullet. Bite the bullet is a battlefield medical. Back in the days when there were no anesthetics, they would actually bite down on a bullet to keep from screaming when somebody cut off their leg or something equally dreadful. So biting the bullet merely means, accepting the inevitable and trying not to scream your head off about it. Wow. When you stop and think about where that comes from, though, that's a pretty vivid image, at least when it comes to my mind. Bringing a knife to a gunfight. That's actually a funny one, but clearly that is military. It means being completely ill-prepared. You are totally outclassed. And you virtually have no chance of prevailing. Bury the hatchet. That's interesting because bury the hatchet means to make peace. But of course, because we are looking at these in such a martial context, we gotta throw that weapon in there somewhere. Let's see. Oh, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. That's actually another funny one. But when you stop and think about it, maybe not. To close ranks. And we'll, if you feel you are being attacked from the outside, maybe somebody insulted a family member, close ranks. Whatever your little petty disagreements within the family are, they are long forgotten in the face of an outside adversary. Cross swords. And that's from actual sword fighting. Cross swords come to blows, which is another version of that. Again, war metaphors. I dodged that bullet. That's one I use a lot. Um, and of course, I'm not literally being shot at. Um, but don't shoot the messenger. That one actually goes really far back. That goes back to Greece, when they would often send messengers back and forth. Someone would come to the king and say, this and that went on in the battle. It wouldn't be good news, and the king might be tempted to, you know, shoot the messenger. Um, what it really means is, I'm just bringing you the news. I didn't make the news. And that's another one, I don't make the news, I just read it. Um, let's see, double-edged sword. That is interesting because ordinarily we take that to mean that if one side doesn't get you, the other side will. That it is, you can say the same thing when you say give with one hand, take with the other. A double-edged sword is something that has a good side, but also a bad side. So if one edge doesn't get you, the other will. Um, drop a bombshell. Usually that is strictly verbal. You've said something that is likely to cause a big stir. Dropped a bombshell. But no, it's not a real explosion. Um, fighting an uphill battle. Now, for anybody who knows about war strategy, back in the day, they didn't want to have to fight on their way uphill. It was much easier to fight on your way downhill. Hence, fighting an uphill battle means taking on a difficult, an especially difficult task. Um, Usually, it's a task that might ordinarily be difficult, but some aspect of it, like that uphill portion, is making it tougher than it has to be. Um, fight fire with fire. That again goes back to Greece, to Rome. So we're looking at 2000 plus years old, when very often they used fire as a weapon of war. So you would respond in kind. Um, flash in the pan. Something that makes a little splash, but it's gone almost immediately. And a flash in a pan has to do with gunpowder, that a little bit of gunpowder would make a flash. But it dissipated immediately, so there was no real substance to it. Get the axe. We had, at one point, we had talked about this, did we? Oh, sacking. That was the context in which we'd spoken about this, and it was in one of the comments when I was talking about uh, differences in the idioms that are used in other parts of the country. When I first went out to Indiana, I went to a grocery store, and a lovely young woman asked me if she wanted me to sack, if I wanted her to sack my groceries. Where I came from, New England, getting sacked meant getting fired from your job. And my first thought was, what have my groceries ever done to this woman that she would want to sack them? But that was her idiom. So getting the axe, yes, means the same thing. What I would call getting sacked, what a person in Indiana would probably call something very different, because sacking there means putting your groceries in a bag. Um, let's see. Gun shy. Uh, Usually that is meant to describe a person who is nervous, probably because they've had a bad experience. Martha didn't want to go out with Jim because she had a bad breakup and she was a little gun shy. Again, war expression. Um, hang fire. All right, this one is an interesting one because this has to do with a round that hasn't gone off yet. So, right back to guns. Oh, hold your fire. Another very common expression, hold your fire. Just stop shooting. But that's not the context in which we say it. Somebody's coming at us complaining about, hold your fire, I wasn't even in the parking lot yesterday. Having something in your sights, that just means that you have your eye on something, metaphorically or physically, or you can actually literally have something in your sights, but ordinarily it's more metaphorical than that. I have the director's job. I have my sights on the director's job, something you want. And in that case, it's totally metaphorical. In other cases, that new dress in the window, I've got my sights on that. I might literally have looked at it and decided I want it. Keep your powder dry. That is one that I don't hear a lot anymore. Our version of that would be kind of hold your horses, I think, because keeping your powder dry is obviously goes back to the days when your gunpowder could get wet, which would mean it wouldn't fire. So this is an earlier time. These days, we don't have to worry about that. We have pretty much solved that problem with our weapons. But yeah. Knight in shining armor. We say that all the time. We don't even realize how martial and military that one is because it's so positive in our minds. It's the person who comes along and rescues you from a bad situation, probably not the way a genuine knight on horseback might come in and rescue you from the vicious highwayman or whatever. Your knight in shining armor could be the person who lends you an umbrella when it's raining out. Still, very, very martial imagery. A lock and load. We hear that. Really, we hear that a lot. And it just means preparation. Really, that's the essence of what that means. Definitely military. Loose cannon. This one was primarily shipboard because cannon on land tends not to rocket around, but on a ship, the recoil from a cannon, cannons actually had to be held in place. They were allowed to move back. Usually they had some track system, but they would be allowed to move back for the recoil. But if the cannon broke loose, you would have this giant piece of equipment just sort of ricocheting, another military term, around the ship. People would be very likely to be badly hurt by that. So when we say it's a loose cannon, we're talking about usually a person who either we or whoever ought to have control over their actions really has no control. Jim was a loose cannon. His boss had absolutely no idea what kind of promises he was making to customers. A long shot. And we discussed this because this was in racing, and it actually came from firearms. Long shot in firearms was distant shot, not likely to be successful, and then it came into horse racing, the long shot was the horse that wasn't likely to win. Again, like that long rifle shot. Let's see. Off like a shot. Zooming out somewhere. That one is a metaphor and an idiom. And we've got like in there, so it's a simile too. Wow. I love it when they're all together. If we just made a little story about it, we could have an allegory. Open up old wounds, which, as we know, just means to raise an issue that was painful at the time, like a wound. So, yep, definitely military. Pull the trigger. That is about as straight up military as you get. But we use the expression pull the trigger on all kinds of things. And I mean, it's very common, and it is so commonplace that it's fallen into the realm of idiom. Pyrrhic victory. I do like this one. This was Pyrrhus who was king of Epirus, and in the Battle of Herculaea, which was 270, 280 BCE, somewhere in there. I swear, at one time I actually knew this. King Pyrrhus had a victory over the Romans, but it was so very, very costly in terms of his own casualties that he said, one more victory like this will ruin us. And it just became known. So a Pyrrhic victory is any time you actually win something, an argument, make a gain, but it has resulted in tremendous losses. So, yeah. Quick on the trigger. That's usually somebody who acts before they've had a chance to think things through. They jump the gun. Remember, we had that one from sports, when you start racing before that gun has been fired to tell you to get going. Rank and file. That's interesting because we have moved that so far away from the army. Rank and file referred to the troops all lined up in formation, rank and file. And now we talk about rank and file in any organizational structure. These are the ordinary members, the oh goodness, I was very close to saying the foot soldiers but I'm right back to those military terms again. The ordinary members, the members who are not officers, not directors, not the people running the organization. And it's so pervasive that we will see things like, well, the rank and file of the Daughters of the American Revolution, which is a bunch of old white-haired ladies in pearls, and we're calling them the rank and file. Let's see, ride shotgun. This one is interesting because this comes from the person who is not driving the carriage in the days when the vehicle, whatever it was, the coach, the vehicle, the wagon, had to be driven by someone with their hands on the rein, and the person sitting next to them would have the gun for protection or aggression. And now riding shotgun just means the front passenger seat of the car. Let's see. Saber battle. that is a lot of aggressive and belligerent talk, you know, rattling our sabers, but not really doing anything. Um, Shell-shocked. Uh, that one came out of the First World War when the heavy artillery, what we would now call PTSD, but at the time they said it was shell shock because very often people would be so physically disoriented by the heavy artillery going off next to them. They might be hearing impaired as a result, but usually it meant their nerves were shot. It was PTSD. We just weren't really clear about those concepts. Let me just grab another couple, and then I've got plenty of them here, so tell it to the Marines. That's one that came out of the Second World War, and tell it to the Marines became a sort of byword for, yeah, I don't really believe you, so tell it to the Marines, see if they buy your story. And it was very interesting because tell it to the Marines was often used, it was an idiom, and idioms don't translate into other cultures. Remember how we were looking at what was going on with the ironing board and, you know, all of those strange expressions from other cultures? When American journalists were sending home reports they would be getting from, in particular, the Soviet government, they would very often throw in tell it to the Marines in the reports, which Americans read as, yeah, right, this is just nonsense. But they would do it to make sure people knew that they didn't believe whatever the official line was. So this particular idiom was incredibly useful in terms of conveying like a completely different subtext. And the Soviets had no idea what it meant. You know, to them it was, yes, and go and tell that division of the armed services that, you know, we have built up our forces, and whatever it was they were saying that the journalist knew was not true, was just propaganda. All right, let's grab one more. War chest. And as I said, I've got 2 pages of them. I've just cherry picked. War chest, we talk about that all the time. We just had an election go by. That's where we hear it most often. And it is the amount of financing one has amassed for a political campaign, which obviously is a war. So let me just throw this in very quickly because I think it has to be said. We should really look at the extent to which we are using idioms and metaphors that come out of war and physical aggression for all kinds of purposes. And we do it constantly. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We have got to fight this disease. We have got to win the battle against COVID. You know, we should look at this because when we think in these terms, it's setting up our little personal ideology in very, very militaristic channels. And it will affect the way we view things. That, as I said, I started reading doctoral dissertations when I was looking this stuff up, mostly because I like to read doctoral dissertations anyway, I will admit it. But I was surprised surprised by the amount of work, scholarly work, that is being used, that is being created, that looking at our use of war metaphors and the potential harm of this. For example, the last one that I just finished, that one this morning, was talking about how this can undermine business ethics when you view business as war and you view your customer as your target. A lot of things that might not be morally acceptable to us start to look a little more palatable because we've brought that mindset into it. And our customer, who should be our partner in business, we may start to think of them as the enemy. And that makes unethical business practices look a little less hard to us. So my challenge to you is, as you go through your life, when you start to catch yourself using war metaphors, metaphors of violence, stop for a second and see if you can't flip that. Find another less military, less violent, less, enemy, aggression, sort of something that's not setting up the us against them dynamic like that, and see if you can do it. I've been doing that all day, and I will tell you, it's not easy. These things are just ground into us, but we should start to look at it, simply because I'm looking at this and I'm seeing something that is probably not all that emotionally healthy. All right, so those were our war metaphors. Tomorrow we have book club, 8 o'clock. Last week I posted the video half an hour early. I had one senior moment after another last week. I'm not sure why. This time out, I'm going to make sure we've got that video posted on time. I posted a link where you could download a PDF version of the book. I will do that. Now, I do this in a pinned comment because I've noticed when I put any links in the video notes, what happens is YouTube's little bot goes in there and yanks the last portion. It'll have, if there are like 15 characters in it, it'll have the first 9 just fine, and then ... They don't like to post links in the video notes. I don't know why. And in fact, I'm going to have to go in and work out how to get some of the links I would like you to have posted so that you could actually get to them. All right. Have a terrific day. I will talk to you again tomorrow night with Book Club. We are starting on a new book. Where are we? Here we are. Good Omens. Good Omens is, it's an easy read. It's a fun book. If you saw the television miniseries, you're going to love this because the book is very close to the series. All right. I will see you all later.